I've worked as a hospital record keeper for 23 years, documenting every admission, transfer, and death at St. Margaret's Medical Center. The job requires meticulous attention to detail, but after 2 decades, I thought I'd seen every possible type of medical record. That was until I discovered Ward 13. St. Margaret's only has 12 wards. At least, that's what I believed until last October, when everything I knew about the hospital and reality itself began to unravel. It started with a filing error. A patient chart had been marked for Ward 13, room 1313. I assumed it was a typo and was about to correct it when I noticed something odd. There were dozens of similar files, all referencing this non-existent ward, dating back to the hospital's founding in 1887. The strangest part? Every single patient in these records had been admitted on October 13th, and none had discharge dates. I should have left it alone. That's what I tell myself now, lying awake at night, listening to the scratching at my bedroom walls. But curiosity has always been my weakness. The hospital's blueprints showed nothing beyond the Ward 12, but I found maintenance logs mentioning repairs in Ward 13. The entries were bizarre, reports of walls bleeding, lights that showed shadows without sources, and temperatures dropping so low that mercury thermometers shattered. Each report was signed by a different maintenance worker, and none of those employees appeared in our HR records. I decided to investigate during my night shift, when the hospital was quietest. The service corridor beyond Ward 12 ended in a blank wall, but as I stood there examining it, I noticed something peculiar. The emergency lights cast 12 distinct shadows behind me, despite there being only one light source. The shadows began to move independently of my movements. They converged on the wall, forming what looked like a door frame. The wall itself seemed to ripple, like dark water, disturbed by an unseen current. Then I heard it, a sound that still haunts my dreams, the muffled sound of hundreds of people whispering in unison, coming from behind the wall. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I reached out and touched the wall. My hand passed through it like smoke. I found myself in a corridor that shouldn't exist. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, illuminating walls that seemed to pulse like living tissue. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something sweet and metallic that made my stomach turn. Patient rooms lined both sides of the hallway, each door made of dark, aged wood with brass numbers. 1301, 1302, 1303. The numbers were crooked, and as I watched, they seemed to rotate slowly, like the hands of a clock moving backward. From behind each door came different sounds, crying, laughing, screaming, singing. But they all shared a strange quality, as if they were being played backward or underwater. I reached room 1313, where the sounds were loudest. The door was ajar. Inside, I found a patient room that defied physics. The ceiling stretched upward infinitely, disappearing into darkness. The walls were covered in medical charts, thousands of them, their pages fluttering without wind. In the center of the room stood a hospital bed, surrounded by outdated medical equipment from different eras, all running despite not being connected to any power source. A figure lay in the bed, covered by a sheet. As I approached, I noticed the sheet was moving, not with the rhythm of breathing, but as if whatever was underneath was constantly changing shape. "We've been waiting for you, Thomas," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who had retired from St. Margaret's 30 years ago. She looked exactly as she had in her staff photo from 1963, down to her cat-eye glasses and perfectly styled hair. but her eyes were completely black, like empty sockets. "How do you know my name?" I managed to ask. She smiled, revealing teeth that were all slightly too long. "We know everyone who's meant to join Ward 13. We've had your bed ready since the day you were born." The figure under the sheet sat up. The fabric clung to it, revealing a form that kept shifting, sometimes human, sometimes something else entirely. "Your records are incomplete," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to a blank chart on the wall. "We need to fix that." The other doors in the hallway began to open, and I heard footsteps, hundreds of them, approaching room 1313. The sheet-covered figure reached out with what might have been a hand. I ran. I don't remember how I found my way back through the wall, but I woke up at my desk with a splitting headache and a new patient chart in front of me. It was mine, partially filled out, with an admission date of October 13th, next year. I tried to quit my job the next day, but my resignation letter transformed into a transfer request for Ward 13 before my eyes. I burned it, only to find it in my mailbox when I got home, unscathed. The hospital's security cameras show me entering the service corridor that night, but never leaving it. When I try to show others the Ward 13 files, they see only blank pages, but I know what I saw, and I know they're waiting for me. Every morning, I check my reflection to make sure I'm still casting only one shadow. Every night, I hear Dr. Chen's voice in my dreams, updating my chart. The admission date draws closer, and sometimes, when I walk through the hospital, I catch glimpses of Ward 13 overlapping with our reality. A door where there shouldn't be one, a corridor that shouldn't exist, or a figure in outdated medical attire walking through walls. Yesterday, I found a note on my desk written in handwriting that looked disturbingly like my own. "Your bed in 1313 is ready." The most terrifying part? I've started to feel drawn to that blank wall beyond Ward 12. Sometimes I find myself standing in front of it without remembering how I got there. And lately, I've noticed my shadow doesn't always move when I do. I'm sharing this story as a warning, but also as evidence. If you're reading this and I've stopped coming to work, don't look for me in the usual places. Check the records for Ward 13 instead. Just be careful. Once you know about it, it knows about you too. And whatever you do, never count your shadows. Because if you start counting them, they start counting you. When I accepted the position as head archivist at St. Augustine's Hospital, I believed I was simply cataloguing 150 years of medical history. I never expected to uncover a horror that had been gestating within these walls since the hospital's founding in 1872. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs, the unusually strict security protocols for the basement archives, the missing personnel records every decade since 1880, and most notably, the complete absence of any documentation about the hospital's founder, Dr. Augustine Valley. My discovery began 3 months into the digitization project. I was converting old patient records when I noticed a peculiar pattern. Every 40 years, spanning exactly 13 days in October, the hospital experienced an unprecedented spike in patient deaths. The official causes varied: cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, sudden organ collapse. But the timing was identical. Even more disturbing, each deceased patient's file contained the same note, written in different hands, but with identical phrasing. Patient exhibited signs of temporal displacement before expiration. The most recent cycle had occurred in 2020, which meant I had almost 37 years before the next one. This should have been comforting. Instead, it filled me with inexplicable dread. The basement archives were housed in a series of climate-controlled rooms, 3 levels below the hospital. The air there was always unusually cold, with a metallic taste that no amount of ventilation could eliminate. During my 4th month, I began noticing subtle changes. The fluorescent lights started flickering in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like Morse code. Security cameras would rotate to track my movements, even when the monitoring station was unmanned. Then, I found the journal. It was hidden behind a false panel in the oldest section of the archives, bound in what I initially thought was black leather. Later, analysis would reveal it was human skin, preserved through some unknown process. The journal belonged to Dr. Vale himself, and its contents defied everything I understood about reality. Vale's entries described experiments in what he called temporal surgery, attempts to manipulate the human lifespan by extracting time itself from living subjects. His theories spoke of time as a tangible substance that could be harvested, stored, and transplanted. The final pages contained detailed blueprints for a machine that could accomplish this, along with a warning: success achieved, but the price is greater than anticipated. They are awake now. They hunger. God forgive me. I spent weeks cross-referencing Vale's journal with hospital records. What emerged was horrifying. Every 40 years, 13 days of time simply vanished from the hospital's history. Security footage from these periods showed only static. Phone records went dead. And the patients who died during these intervals. Their bodies were never released to families, instead being transferred to a mysterious research wing that appeared in no official blueprints. My research was interrupted by a peculiar encounter with Dr. Sarah Chen, one of our eldest board members. She found me in the archives late one night, surrounded by Vale's documents. "You've found it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice carrying an odd resonance. "Vale's little project?" Her eyes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Before I could respond, she handed me a key card I'd never seen before. "Sub-level 5. What you're looking for is there. But remember, curiosity has a price in this place." I didn't know we had a sub-level 5. The elevator shouldn't have gone down that far, but when I inserted the key card, a hidden panel revealed a new button. The descent took longer than it should have, and the air pressure changed dramatically. When the doors opened, I found myself in a corridor that seemed to extend infinitely in both directions. The walls were lined with what looked like glass tanks, each filled with a swirling opalescent fluid that moved against gravity. As I approached the nearest tank, I realized with horror that the fluid was forming patterns, human faces pressed against the glass, silently screaming. A plaque beneath the tank read, "Temporal Extract, Subject 2, 849, October 1880. They weren't just storing time, they were storing the consciousness of every patient who had died during those 13-day cycles. Hundreds of tanks, thousands of faces, all trapped in a perpetual moment of terror. At the end of the corridor stood Vale's machine, still humming with impossible energy. The design matched his blueprints exactly, but he'd failed to mention the human components integrated into its structure. Bones, organs, and tissue had been fused with the mechanical parts, creating a hybrid of flesh and metal that pulsed with unnatural life. A modern laptop sat incongruously next to the machine, its screen displaying a countdown: 37 years, 2 months, 15 days, until next harvest. That's when I heard Dr. Chen's voice behind me, but when I turned, she wasn't alone. 5 other figures stood with her, each wearing a hospital board member's badge, but their faces were wrong, like masks stretched over something that had never been human. "We are the shepherds," Chen said, her voice now overlapping with others. "Vale created us to manage his legacy. The machine requires feeding. Time must be harvested. The cycle must continue." "Why?" I managed to ask. "Because it's hungry," she replied, her face splitting into a smile that revealed too many teeth. "And if we don't feed it contained harvests every 40 years, it will consume time indiscriminately. Vale learned that the hard way in 1872. That year, an entire century vanished from the world outside these walls. History reformed around the void, but the damage..." She gestured to her inhuman face. "Some of us remember what we truly lost." I ran, but the corridor stretched endlessly. Every turn brought me back to the machine. The faces in the tanks watched my futile escape attempt, their expressions morphing from terror to pity. When I finally found my way back to the main archive, 3 days had passed. Dr. Chen and the board members had no recollection of our encounter. The key card had vanished from my pocket, and I could no longer find the hidden elevator panel. But things had changed. I began noticing gaps in my memory, moments where time seemed to skip like a scratched record. My reflection started showing subtle distortions, and sometimes, in certain lights, I could see something moving beneath my skin. Yesterday, I found a note on my desk, written in my own handwriting, but I have no memory of writing it. The price of knowledge is participation. See you in 37 years. This morning, I discovered a board member's badge in my drawer, with my name and a photo that doesn't quite look like me anymore. I'm sharing this record because I know what's coming. If you're reading this, stay away from St. Augustine's Hospital during October 2057. If you notice any hospital staff whose faces seem slightly wrong, run. And if you ever hear about a medical facility attempting to revolutionize temporal therapy, remember, some forms of surgery cut deeper than flesh. The machine is hungry, and soon I'll be one of its shepherds. But maybe, if this warning survives, someone can break the cycle before another 13 days vanish into those terrible tanks. Just remember, if you're reading this during October, check the date carefully. Time moves strangely in St. Augustine's, and those 13 days have a way of finding new victims. And if you see Dr. Chen, or someone wearing my face, don't look too closely. Some distortions are better left unexamined. After all, time is not just a river, it's an ocean. And in its depths, ancient things wait to feed. I never should have answered that ad, seeking participants for a memory enhancement study at Blackwood Neurological Institute. The compensation was generous, $5,000 for a 2-week trial, but I didn't need the money. What I needed were answers about my sister Emily's disappearance. She had been a participant in the same study 6 months earlier, and then she vanished, leaving behind only a journal filled with increasingly disturbing entries about memories that don't belong to me. The institute itself was an imposing structure of glass and steel rising from the outskirts of the city, its windows reflecting the perpetually overcast sky. Dr. Victoria Nash, the lead researcher, had the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. During my initial interview, she seemed particularly interested in my connection to Emily. "Fascinating," she said, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "Siblings often share similar neural patterns. You might be exactly what we need for Phase 2. I should have asked what happened to Phase 1. I should have noticed how her pen wasn't actually writing anything on those pages. The first week seemed normal enough. They conducted baseline tests, took brain scans, and had me perform various memory exercises while connected to what they called a neural resonance mapper. The device hummed with a sound that made my teeth ache. But Dr. Nash assured me this was normal. The other participants, 12 of us in total, shared a living space in the Institute's residential wing. There was James, a retired history professor with early-stage Alzheimer's. Maria, a trauma survivor seeking to recover lost memories. And twins, Sarah and Sophie, who never quite explained why they were there. The nightmares began on day 8. I dreamed I was walking through endless hospital corridors, opening doors that led to memories that weren't mine. A little boy watching his dog die, an old woman saying goodbye to her husband, a soldier seeing his friends die in combat. I woke up with tears on my face and the taste of other people's fear in my mouth. During group sessions, I noticed subtle changes in the others. James started reciting vivid details about historical events he couldn't possibly have witnessed. Maria spoke about childhood memories in different voices, as if multiple people were sharing her mouth. The twins stopped speaking entirely, communicating only through shared glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. On day 10, I found my first memory leak. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed water pooling on the bathroom floor. But it wasn't water. It was too thick, too iridescent. As I watched, images formed in its surface. A young woman in a white dress running through rain. A child's birthday party where all the guests wore animal masks. A funeral where the mourners had no faces. With growing horror, I realized I was seeing fragments of memories seeping out of my mind like water from a cracked vessel. That night, I broke into Dr. Nash's office. Her journal contained drawings of what looked like a massive machine, with notes about memory extraction and consciousness transference. The last page held a single sentence. The reservoir is almost full. In the basement, I found Emily's journal hidden behind a loose panel. Her final entry chilled me to my core. The memories aren't just being enhanced, they're being harvested. Dr. Nash calls it emotional distillation. Each memory they take from us feeds something in that machine they're building. But they didn't tell us the cost. The empty spaces in our minds don't stay empty. They fill up with something else, something old, something hungry. I can feel it growing in the hollow places where my memories used to be. It whispers about a world before time, before memory, before light. And it wants out. If you're reading this, Rebecca, run. The Phase 2. Their planning isn't about memory enhancement. It's about making space for something else to move in. The next morning, during what was supposed to be a routine scan, I saw it. The neural resonance mapper wasn't just recording our brain activity. It was connected to a massive chamber beneath the institute. Through the observation window, I watched in horror as our extracted memories swirled like liquid light, forming patterns that seemed almost alive. Dr. Nash found me there, staring into the reservoir. She wasn't smiling anymore. "Your sister was special," she said. "Her neural architecture was perfect for the transfer. But you're even better. A perfect vessel." The other researchers weren't human anymore. Their faces had become smooth, featureless expanses of skin. The twins stood among them, holding hands, their eyes now solid black pools. "The old ones existed before memory," Dr. Nash continued. "They were trapped when humanity's collective consciousness formed a barrier between realities. But now, with enough space cleared in human minds, they can return. Your sister helped us prove it was possible. Now, you'll help us perfect the process." I ran, but the corridors had changed. Each door I opened led to another memory being drained. James screaming as his life story was siphoned away. Maria convulsing as something else filled the empty spaces in her mind. the twins performing a strange dance as their original personalities dissolved. I found myself in the reservoir chamber. The liquid memories had taken on a pattern I recognized. Emily's face, formed from thousands of stolen moments. Her mouth moved, forming words, the space between memories. That's where they live now. Security found me 3 days later in a supply closet, my clothes soaked in liquid memories, repeating Emily's name. The official investigation found nothing unusual at the institute. Dr. Nash and the other researchers had vanished, along with all the other participants. The basement levels were empty, the reservoir chamber sealed with concrete. But something came back with me. In the spaces where my memories used to be, I feel it stirring. Sometimes I catch glimpses of it in mirrors, a darkness moving behind my eyes, wearing my face like a mask. My memories are fading, replacing themselves with visions of impossible cities and creatures that exist in dimensions of pure thought. Last week, I received a letter from Dr. Nash. Inside was a single photograph. Emily standing with the research team, her eyes black and empty, her smile too wide for her face. On the back was written, "Phase 3 begins soon. The spaces are ready." I'm sharing this because the hollow places in my mind are growing larger. I find myself drawn to strangers on the street, seeing the potential spaces in their minds where memories could be removed, where something else could take root. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear Emily's voice coming from my own mouth, whispering about the things that live in the spaces between memories, waiting to be remembered. If you see an advertisement for memory enhancement studies at Blackwood Neurological Institute, run. If you notice gaps in your memories, growing larger each day, fill them quickly with new experiences before something else moves in. And if you meet someone whose smile never reaches their eyes, someone who seems to be reading from an empty notebook, look away, because the spaces in your mind are not as empty as you think, and what fills them may not be you anymore. I know, because I'm not entirely me anymore either, and the thing wearing my sister's memories is getting stronger every day.